Greetings. Welcome to T.Q.M Insights and Stories. My name is John Frahm, and in this session, we are going to focus on how on earth do you manage individual performance, the performance of your team. Now, this is perhaps could end up being my most valuable teaching that I ever offer you. I mean, this message is going to be like pure gold because it is a very difficult subject. I don't think people really know how to manage performance anymore. And I'm not just speaking for myself being a director or a manager in the newspaper industry, but I'm a customer to a lot of people just like you. So I see performance within like service industry, whether it's restaurants or hotels or some form of entertainment. I also see it in the medical profession, especially as I get older. I can tell performance there, or repairs and maintenance for automobiles, or purchasing of automobiles, right? Contractors. I mean, there's a whole range. And if I was to grade based on my experiences and what I read, at best, if I'm being kind, I'd give us like a C- on managing performance. And that's probably being very kind. Because really, the truth is, we don't manage performance. I think basic supervisory skills, including within those that are in the highest positions, especially those that are in the highest positions, they seem to be the worst at it, quite honestly, from what I see. And so it doesn't surprise me that their team reflects the lacking within the senior leaders, whether you're a manager, director, or like I say, even a CEO or owner of a company. So as we dive into it, what I want you to know, I want to remind you, there's nothing that I'm going to share with you that I came up with. I didn't invent any of this. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you insights to a conversation that I had with the director of HR at Hart Hanks. His name was Mark. And this conversation might have lasted 10 minutes, and it changed my life for the better. I began to learn what it means. It was like the introduction for me about how to manage individual performance, and I'm going to pass that along to you. Now, here's what I also want you to know. A, very few people are ever going to listen to this message. B, those who start listening to this message will not finish it. And those who do finish this message are not going to do what I'm going to tell you to do. Okay? So my point is, you want to stand out? Well, then you apply with what I'm about to tell you, because very few people, sadly, are going to do it. You're not going to be happy with this solution. You're looking for some magic, looking for something that doesn't require so much work. There is no shortcut to usefulness. There just isn't. There's just things that take work and time. If you care, then you're willing to take the effort and the time necessary. Okay, so first thing I want you to do is look at your screen up at top. Remember, there are two recommendations I'm telling you about Zinger Miller, how to develop supervisory skills, interacting with other people, and ODI does an exceptional job, I found, when I was coming up as a manager on total quality management and learning how to drive continuous improvement within your organization. And then I'm giving you a list of books. So you can go to Harvard and spend hundreds of thousands of dollars, go to Harvard Business School, or you could spend hundreds of dollars and just buy those books. Now, the first point I want to make out to you is, so you buy those books, you read those books, and you're like, oh man, I only do maybe like 25% of what they're telling me to do. Well, you're going to be a remarkable leader. So I just want to get rid of this notion that, this idea that we're all going to be someday perfect, at least on this side of the grave. And it's not going to happen. So just applying 25% of what you learn from these books will be absolutely remarkable. And as you apply, just like when you're exercising the body, you will build up your body, your immune system, and you'll become stronger as a leader. In other words, it takes practice. It takes effort. And so you'll apply some of these principles, and then you'll utterly fail. But you're fighting the good fight, if you will, to advance the cause by applying these total quality management principles. So what I'm saying is you're applying the principles, and there's times that you fail because perhaps the situations are very extreme. I've certainly encountered that myself, but it doesn't mean the principles are bad. It just means there might be things that you forgot about, or you're in a situation where it might take years to resolve. In other words, to become really a quality organization, it probably, including, takes commitment of senior leadership, probably takes an organization, I'd say 4 to 5 years to make the culture change. Now, let's just say you don't have any support within your company, but you're a manager of a department. Well, you're going to be able to do some good by buying these books and applying these principles, but you can't think just because you're doing it, setting the right example, hopefully it will have influence on the other parts of the organization, but it's not like the organization is going to become a quality culture organization. Your department is going to exhibit some qualities of that, but you're only going to be able to take it so far. But whatever that improvement is, my friend, it is worth the journey. Okay? So I want to point that out to you. Next, let's look at the next slide. What is the goal? The goal is to put everyone to work to delight their internal and external customers. That's the goal. Your goal as a leader is to put everyone to work to delight their internal and external customers, period. So this is incredibly helpful because people are deceived in thinking, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to get people to like me, and then therefore they're going to work for me. Now, I'm not suggesting to you that doesn't happen sometimes, but no, that doesn't produce the best results. Or I know what I'm going to do is I'm going to have really high expectations. I'm going to apply all kinds of pressure, even fear, and that's going to cause people to perform. Well, again, that can work, but it will only take you so far because eventually everyone gets tired of fear. Okay? So what I'm saying is people will gravitate towards a million different ways of thinking about how they're going to advance their cause in business. But what they don't see is they reject this notion of what I'm suggesting is what you do is you put everyone to work to delight their internal and external customers. Again, we orbit around customers. And that whole notion is something that we fight against. Okay, but we must come to terms with it. That principle is the best way forward. Number 2, as a leader, where does your authority and credibility come from? Okay, well, that's why I emphasized in the first 2 messages, your authority as a leader doesn't come from your title, I would argue. It's a start, but it doesn't come from your title. It doesn't come from what you say about yourself. No. What it comes from is it comes from knowing your internal and external customers. So remember, that's why I emphasized in the first 2 messages. What products and services do you provide your customers? What do they do with what you provide them? And are there any gaps between what you provide them and what they need? See, asking those questions can generate hundreds of action items. Hundreds of action items that you use to put your people to work. Okay? Makes sense? And when people are asking you, and sometimes getting snarky or very difficult, why are we doing this? Well, you're going to be able to give them an answer. You're going to be able to speak from authority. It doesn't mean you're going to win everybody over. But you're going to be able to speak from authority because you know your customers. The next one, where does your credibility come from? I haven't talked about this much. Or not at all, actually. Your credibility, though, comes from understanding the current process, what the current process is capable of achieving, and how to improve upon it. So, I'm in the printing business as an example. And if I'm asking my team to accomplish something that isn't possible based on the complexity and the type of work, well, then that causes nothing but frustration. And I lose credibility because I'm asking the team to do something that they can't do. You follow me? It could even be as easily as I'm going to go to an extreme here, but maybe the team is not even developed to accomplish such objectives that you have set for them. So, for example, would it be fair to take a high school football team and say, hey, I got some good news for you. You're playing against the Seahawks this Sunday. Congratulations. Well, how well do you think that's going to go? Your team isn't ready for that kind of challenge. And that quite often is what managers are doing. You're asking people to do things that they're not capable of doing. And maybe it's because of lack of training. Maybe it's because the process or the equipment or the supplies are not capable of achieving the outcome. So it's important that you know what the process is capable of doing, what the throughput is, the quality, reliability, what is the downtime based on the current condition of equipment, all of those things. You can think about it in the service industry, right? So for example, it's very important for restaurants to know when are their peak hours of service. Why? So that they can have the appropriate amount of cooks and servers available in order to meet that demand. But if you overwhelm a restaurant with customers and your staffing is not adequate, they're going to become overwhelmed and customers are going to be dissatisfied. Do you see what I mean? You have to know what the process is capable of doing. Restaurants are very smart by telling sometimes we can't serve you tonight because we're all booked. We're booked. And we don't want to frustrate you. I mean, it's a sad thing to turn away clients, but that is far better than overwhelming everybody and tell them that you'd be happy to, book them the next day, and maybe you give them a little bit of a discount or something of that nature for the inconvenience of the fact that they have to come back another day. But I'm jumping ahead. But the basic, what I'm pointing out is, regardless of whether you're in service or manufacturing or medical field, understanding what the process is capable of achieving is where your credibility comes from. That's why I would argue, as a norm, like I'm in the printing business. So could I effectively go run Kellogg's and make cereal? No, I don't know anything about the food industry. Oh my goodness. The safeguards that are in place, producing products that people are going to consume, I know nothing about that. Or, hey, John, we're going to take you and put you in the automobile industry. You're going to go work for Ford. Or you're going to go work for Apple. Now, are some of my skills transferable? Yes. But I would argue the best leaders have a technical understanding of what their teams are achieving. Okay? So that would be my general argument. And the reason I make that argument is because it gives you credibility if you understand what the process is capable of achieving. I think I'm going too much on that point, but I just really want to emphasize it because I've seen so many people fail because they don't understand their process. They really don't understand what their teams are doing. Okay? And then the last one, how are we going to manage performance? And this, I'm going to give you the solution, and you're not going to be happy about it, maybe, but it's based on trends. And so I want you to look at the control chart now. And so what you see on the control chart is you see an upper control limit and a lower control limit. So what this chart tells us, it has natural variation, and that natural variation sometimes we're overproducing, and then other times we're underproducing. Okay, so we're above the average and under. So you could simply look at this and say, when we're above the average, performance is good, and when we're below, performance is lacking. Now, could that chart be communicating that? Yes, it could be. But on the other hand, even though you see an above average performance, it doesn't necessarily mean, or above average output, let me put it that way, it doesn't necessarily mean superior performance, because the above average output simply could be caused because the work that's being produced has a lower complexity. Lower complexity, higher output. And when the output is low, that could be caused by higher complexity. So it's very possible that the team that is producing a higher complexity of work that has a lower output actually has superior performance over those that have a higher output and have low complexity. So that's why it's very important that you understand the process. What is the process capable of achieving? And don't make quick conclusions. So I'll give you an example. Waste. There was a particular unit within a company, and they had the best waste percentage, the lowest waste, right? Every company, no matter where you're at, you're a machine shop, you want to have low waste, right? So no matter what organization, there's always waste, whether it's in time or supplies, whatever it might be, rework, right? So they had the lowest waste. Now, did they have the best waste? Yes, I agree they had the lowest waste percentage. But did they have the best waste performance within their company? Because it was a large corporation. And the answer is no. They had the worst waste performance. Their waste percentage was low based on the complexity and the scope of work that they were doing. If you understood what the process was capable of doing, they were able to reduce their waste by 50%. So what I'm saying is you could actually show yourself to be number one in something, but in reality, you're number one because of luck. That's it. It's just luck. You got lucky. The stuff that you're producing, it's easy. And while other people have higher complexity, and so your waste percentage looks good, but in reality, if you were achieving what the process was capable of achieving, like in this case, the waste would go down by 50%. Now, the other thing, too, is you want to do it based on trends because there are two extremes that managers, and this goes back to a conversation that I had with this HR director at Hart Hanks, as I mentioned before. His name was Mark. This is part of that 10-minute conversation I had with him. And he said to me, I was in my 20s, and he said, John, listen, there are two extremes managers go to. Number one, they overreact when there's a problem because they're fed up. When you overreact, you can come across being very self-righteous, because you're just absolutely fed up with what's going on, okay? And maybe even anger is driving you, all right? So you're just fed up. You're embarrassed. That could be another emotion that's driving it. And now you just want to resolve this issue. And then the other extreme is you ignore it. You just ignore performance issues. Most people do. You rationalize it. You justify it. Even though the process is capable of achieving far better, like in the example I gave you, even though we could reduce our waste by 50%, we still show ourselves to be number one, and everyone thinks we're number one. So that's good. We'll just stick with that, okay? And so poor performance just becomes acceptable, sadly. Now, here's the challenge I also need to point out to you, and I will create a separate message for this, but there is a cost to addressing performance. Undoubtedly, if you do it long enough, you'll be accused and called all sorts of names and all sorts of accusations. Why? I mean, imagine a situation where a team has been underperforming for like 5 years or even a decade, and then you come along and start applying T.Q.M principles and say, hey, we're going to stop orbiting around ourselves and we're going to orbit around customers. And hey, I've got 7 action items we need to do that will delight our internal customers and our external customers. So you're going to be asking people to change. And you're going to be asking for their buy-in. And you provide them all the data and answer all their questions. And they don't want to do it. There's a resistance. And you have to start addressing individual performance issues because you have teammates who are not meeting the expectations. Though you put them in a position to flourish, they just refuse to. There's going to be conflict. I'm going to keep that for a second, another message for sometime in the future. But I want to put it out there as plainly as possible. It's not because you're doing something wrong. And then there's going to be people above you that says, well, couldn't you have done it this way or that way? You know, again, people who have lived with poor performance for years is going to try to like coach you from instead of them being in the game on the field, they're going to try to coach you from the bleachers. Okay? Because leading continuous improvement and showing dramatic change will be embarrassing for some people because they're going to realize, oh my God, I could have done this 5 years ago or 10 years ago. Yeah, you're going to find examples of that. Okay, so this is why, so we don't want to overreact. We don't want to ignore performance issues. This is why we want to manage performance based on trends. And then we want to understand those trends. And I would define a trend as 3 to 5 data points. So for example, let's just take an easy one. If an employee is late or absent, 3 to 5 times, let's just say within 3 to 6 months. Well, that certainly is a great concern, right? I mean, the truth is, employees should be able to show up on time. That should just be the norm. But once in a while, somebody's going to get a flat tire. Let's say it's once a year. But if they're getting a flat tire once a month or once every other week, then something is wrong, right? So you're not going to necessarily address it on the first encounter or even the second. But once there's a trend that's developed, well, it requires your attention. So when you see a trend, whether it's poor quality, high waste, poor service, not supporting their teammates, whatever it might be, some behavioral issue even, because behaviors are performance, not attitude. Don't ever address attitude issues. We're not talking about that, but behavioral issues. Okay? Passing the negative, being condescending is a behavioral performance issue. So you see something that's where a trend is developed 3 to 5 times, well, that's the indication that says you need to address it. And by doing it that way and treating everybody the same, then again, you have credibility because you have examples. It's not, no one's going to be, you're going to get accused of perhaps even targeting people or accused that you don't like somebody. No, you're going to have dates and times when things happened along with the impact of that, whatever that poor performance led to, so that you can, again, speak from a position of credibility because you're speaking from a position of knowledge. You're dealing with reality. You're dealing with facts. So that's why we want to manage performance based on trends. Next, look at the next slide. You'll want to take some time and just put your employees in 4 quadrants. You have the willing and capable. Those are the people that you want to have in the most important positions. They're skilled, they're capable. You just need to support them, give them the materials, the supplies, the support that they need, and they just go. They're quite often very self-managing. They're willing and capable. If they have 20 years of experience doing something, or 20 years of service, they have 20 years of experience. They tend to be individuals that are always improving, no matter how long they've been at a task. They're just absolutely dependable. They're just true treasures. Then you have people that are willing and incapable. Oh, they're hungry. They get it. They want to delight their internal and external customers. So they're willing, but they're incapable. And what do those people need? They need training, right? They're soon going to be like the willing and capable, but you just got to put them in a position where they can flourish and learn new skills that are lacking. And so training for that quadrant for sure. Now let's see, you have the unwilling and capable. Now I would say that maybe my success rate might be 50%, let's say. Because sometimes these employees have been discouraged or set aside, and their just morale sucks. And a lot of times it's because of management. I do agree with Dr. Deming that ultimately, because again, we are the ones hiring everyone. We are the ones deciding to keep people on the team. But I agree with this notion that 80% of all problems within an organization tie back to management. I do agree with that. It's a general principle, a good proverb. But with the unwilling and capable, a lot of times it involves just having discussions and developing a business relationship where they can see they feel like they've been wrong perhaps, or set aside, or they feel unimportant. I can't tell you the number of times I remember when I was a pre-press manager in Brea, again working for Hart Hanks. There were some individuals highly talented, but they were unwilling, and they were unwilling because it was just a toxic relationship that they had with the senior director. It didn't need to be so. And once we changed that, well, then things got incredibly better. They became part of the willing and capable group. I remember there's one individual that was performing. He was unwilling but capable, and we gave him eventually we gave him an incredibly large increase. Why? Well, because his waste and quality performance was superior than anyone else. What he was looking for was recognition. Recognition. And when people don't get recognition, it makes them believe that what they're doing is unimportant, which is not the case. Then you have the unwilling and incapable. So you could say this group needs a discussion and training, but often, no. These are the groups that really, employees that shouldn't be on the team. Or if they are on the team, they need to be in positions where it's just very narrow in terms of that they're task oriented. It's a repetitive task. It's easily measured, and you don't want them in any type of position of a leadership or anything of that nature. You wouldn't want them to be in a position where they can have impact on customers. Minimal impact. Why? Because they're not credible. You don't find them to be credible. They're unwilling and they're incapable. They could sit here and tell you, "Oh, I have 20 years of experience." I can't tell you the number of times I've got 20 years of experience, and you're telling me I don't know my job, John. And what I would say to them is, no. You have 20 years of service that has been lived out, but you have 1 year of experience. So you have 20 years of service, 1 year of experience. So you've been doing the same thing with your 1 year of experience 20 times. You've never grown. You learned a little bit, and you grew a little bit your first year on the job, and then you stopped. So you don't have 20 years of experience. You have 20 years of service with 1 year of experience, and you're just living that year out 20 times. And that's the issue. And no, that's not well received. But so my point being is that by putting your employees in these different quadrants, you can start thinking through, well, what are the root causes here? I'm not suggesting to you that anyone that falls in the unwilling and incapable can't be redeemed. They can't change their mind, but a lot of times they're not applying themselves. And it's been my experience that it shouldn't be a lot of employees that fall into this group, but it seems to me that maybe 10% of my personal experience that people are able to get themselves out of that quadrant because they've changed their mind. And that has happened. I've had employees with tears in their eyes, very emotional, years later would come back and would apologize to me for their terrible behavior and their absolute resistance. And so there have been some exceptions to that, to what I'm suggesting to you, and I thank God for that. But I just simply want to say, when somebody falls into the unwilling and incapable group, and they've been doing it for years, that is a tough problem to solve. And really, it has more to do with them than with you. And it really is the question of whether they should even be on the team is the question. Okay, so now here comes the issue. Okay, so I've given you principles. I'm not going to go through them again. You can go back and listen to them, right? I've given you the control chart about why we manage performance based on trends. I've given you a way to think about employees who are the willing and capable, and how do you support the hell out of them. And then the willing and incapable, well, those are great people too. You just want to give them some training, some guidance. The unwilling and capable group, well, you want to talk with them and see how much ownership you have in that problem, and quite candidly, how much of the problem is they own it, right? And so can you reconcile with that employee is what I'm saying, and get them back into the willing and capable group as fast as possible. And then hopefully maybe it's only 5% of the group or 10% of the group, but the unwilling and incapable, well, you want to, if you will, you want to put them in a repetitive job, if all possible, where they have the least amount of influence. And then ultimately you want to begin managing performance, because it's totally fair to say, I don't even know, in all likelihood, these employees should not even be on the team because they're hurting us. Okay, so how do you do it? How do you manage performance? Well, we'll go to the next slide. Well, you got to buy some tools. You got to have a pencil or a pen. You got to have some Post-it notes. And you got to have manila file folders. Those are the tools. A pen, Post-it notes, and a file folder. And this is what Mark, the HR director, said to me. And this was absolutely genius. Okay? Because I was a supervisor, and let's just say I had like maybe 6 or 8 people at the time. He said, John, what you do is you take a manila file folder and you write everyone's name on the file folder. And you commit to yourself to write, I think he said 1 to 3 notes a day. 1 to 3 notes a day about your team. And don't just simply write a note that says, oh, Harry or Sally came in 5 minutes late today. Write the notes, capture everything. Everything resulting around quality and productivity and initiative and results and reliability, how people are supporting others. I would have a pressman that would work an extra hour of overtime in order to train someone else. I would write notes all the time about just the care that they took to help others. So what Mark was encouraging me is look at the details that are often overlooked, that are pure gold within your team, that really advance the cause of continuous improvement. So he was really wanting to emphasize not documenting the things that went wrong, but the things that went right. Start with that, the things that went right. And so that's what I started doing. And what was remarkable about it all is that my reviews, because Hart Hanks was insisting that we did annual performance reviews, for increases and things of that nature, my reviews were exceptional. They were easy to write. The examples I were able to provide were crystal clear. And I got a lot of compliments for the quality, the depthness of the reviews I was offering. And they were like, John, you have an amazing mind. Why? Because I was able, if I'm giving the reviews, let's say in October, as an example, and I'm citing things that happened back in February and January and December the year prior, they're like, going, how could you remember all these things? Now, what's the truth? The truth is, I listened to Mark, the HR director, and I didn't remember them. I just wrote them down when it happened. And then by putting all these notes in this manila folder, I would just pull my folder out, open it up. I've got, maybe 30, 40 notes in there over the course of a year. And then those notes would help me with my review. Now, what about somebody who is constantly making a mistake? Well, I'm documenting that. And a lot of times what would end up happening is I go, wait a minute, I think I've addressed this issue 2 or 3 times already. And I would go back to the manila folder, and as I'm putting in the most recent incident, I'm going, oh my goodness, I've talked to this person now 2 or 3 times about this issue. And so a lot of times it would result around quality. Sometimes it would be running things out of order and therefore causing downtime for packaging department, things of that nature. And so I would have estimates on the cost of their poor performance or the cost of poor decision making. And I'd be able to show them, we talked about this today, but then I went back and I looked and I go, we talked about this 2 months ago, and then 3 months ago, and then 6 months ago. And so you're beginning to lose credibility with me because you're not following through. And by the way, this has cost, $2,200. So now when I have 3 or 4 examples, I have a trend. Well, progressive disciplinary action begins. So I'm having coaching, I'm having discussions, I'm documenting. I'm also documenting that we've gained agreement when I talk to the employee. Yes, we're going to do things and we're going to consider the priorities of the packaging department. And then all of a sudden, we're not considering the priorities of the packaging department and doing whatever we want to do, regardless of the impact to others. And so now it's time to write a verbal written warning. So it's a verbal warning, but it's in writing to begin the disciplinary, because what I'm saying as a supervisor is, I'm beginning to lose confidence in you because there's been a pattern where you're not thinking about your customers, and therefore I'm losing confidence. So I'm holding you accountable by issuing this written verbal warning. Let's say the pattern continues. The Post-it notes continue to pile up. And I go, now, wait a minute now. I've talked to them 3 or 4 times. I've issued them a verbal written warning. And now I've got another 2 times on top of that now. Well, now it's time for a written warning. Because, again, they're not following through in delighting their customers. I've given them the information. The process is capable of doing it. I've answered all of their questions. And they're just refusing to do it. They're not aligned. And so I would explain that in the written warning. And that, yes, in failure to take prompt corrective action can result in further disciplinary action up to including termination. And that is how, and then once you get to the written warning stage and you've issued that, and sadly, the performance continues. And now you got another 2 or 3 examples after the written warning. At that point, what you want to do is you want to sit down with whoever your superior is, whoever you report to, as well as human resources, and you sit down and you look at the facts. And you should have already begun this conversation. I would recommend either at the verbal written warning or shortly thereafter, where if you don't see, like you can see this coming to a head, where a written warning is going to have to be issued, well, I definitely would get HR and your senior manager involved at that time. In other words, you over-communicate. Because here's the other thing. There's a belief that says the reason why managers don't address performance issues is that they don't want to look bad. They don't want to discuss the performance issues within their team because they think it's a poor reflection on them. And quite often, a lot of times, I understand that fear because not all HR departments are equal. And some HR departments are like, hey, you're creating a lot of noise. There's a lot of static. You've got employees, because once you start holding people accountable, again, the name calling will come about and you'll be accused of all sorts of things, perhaps, versus people taking ownership of their performance issues. And you might be second guessed in many different ways. Okay? That will happen. And so, but the mistake is, because I remember there was a manager over a transportation department, and HR told him, we don't want any static from this group. So just give in to them. And so he was told that, and he kept emails when HR is instructing him to begin doing this way, because he knew eventually somebody's going to ask him, why these employees are grossly underperforming. How did that happen? Well, it's because we didn't want to address any issues. We didn't want the static. And this manager knew that while he disagreed with it, ultimately he was being vetoed and he was having to accept a lot of nonsense. Now that I can only think of one time that's ever happened in my career, but it did happen. All right. So the point being is, I would argue that if there's never noise or static or some angst that is going on, then something is probably wrong. Something is probably being overlooked. Now, I'm not suggesting to you that a department should be full of drama. No. Like I had the privilege of managing many good teams, just healthy teams, customer-focused teams. Been absolutely blessed by it. And sometimes I just inherited them. Oh my goodness, it was terrific. So there were very few performance issues, but there were always performance issues. I have never been in a position of leadership without having some individual performance issues to address. Okay? So I've given you the process. Oh, I need a pen. I need Post-it notes. I need manila file folders. I put the names, and then I start documenting, and then the facts govern the performance of that individual. And I'm doing it based on trends. Now you go, John, wait a minute. Hold on. This isn't going to work because I have 1,000 employees. I have 30 different managers, and we all can't be having a bunch of different manila file folders. And then how am I going to know what some other manager did on some other night when I'm not even working, right? Because you can have one employee, if you have a lot of employees, right? Well, then you could have that one employee working with many different managers, right? And there could be the same performance issue that keeps popping up, but it never gets addressed because nobody ever sees the trend. Okay. So take a look up at your screen. So when I was a manager of 6 to 8 people, maybe a dozen, the pen, Post-it note, manila folder works really well. But when that doesn't work, because again, as I grew and as a director, where I was dealing with hundreds of people, I wrote a web application that you could either develop yourself or you can buy in the marketplace. So what do? Well, you don't want a filing cabinet full of manila folders. What you want is all this information into a database. So you write a web page that is going to send information into the database about performance. So that web page, if you will, becomes your post-it note. And then you hit submit. Everything goes into the database. Of course, you want the database to be secure. So you're writing performance concern about somebody who is not following direction, and it's Harry, and it's Monday night, and then all of a sudden Harry's working Wednesday days, and he does the same thing, and another manager puts it into the database, and then 3 weeks later, he's working Saturday night, and lo and behold, Harry's doing it again, and then the manager puts it in again, and then at the end of the month, or maybe every 2 weeks, you can retrieve a report by employee and see if there's any trends that have developed. Because again, when you're submitting your performance observations into the database, you can put it by category, whether it falls under quality or productivity or downtime, whatever it might be. And so you can then look for trends. So my point is, you can really personalize performance. Okay? And because, yes, it is difficult to manage performance among the masses, but it's not impossible. You just need a better tool. Okay? So a pen, post-it notes, and manila file folders ain't going to cut it for a very large organization. But you can accomplish the same thing far more efficiently by having a software application, having web-based. Everything goes into the database, and then you can spit out reports like you see there. Okay? Better tool, the right tool for the right size of the organization. So, for example, I had an employee, this was at the Baltimore Sun, and he was causing an enormous amount of downtime, the highest amount of downtime. How did I know it? Well, I hired a software programmer, probably paid like $5,000 or $10,000 to do what I'm just saying here, but this had to do with stats that we're capturing regarding downtime. And a lot of times this individual was intentionally causing downtime, by the way. And so what I pointed out to him, based on the evidence, because nobody knew what he was doing, or they knew it, but they didn't know it, if that makes sense. But by putting all this data within the database and then generating reports, what it showed was wherever he worked, downtime went up incredibly. So we had 4 different presses, and so when he's working on press 1, downtime goes up. When he goes off to press 3, downtime goes up, and so on. So the point is, I was able to address this performance issue with this individual and show him the patterns and let him know that what I believed what he was doing was intentionally causing downtime, intentionally harming the team, that it made absolutely no sense that with the PMs that we're doing and the repairs and things of this nature. And I remember one time he said to me, well, this particular problem here, downtime, was electrical. And it was a speed match problem. And I said, you're absolutely right. It was a speed match problem. But here's the problem. Why did it take 4 times before us to identify that it was a speed match problem? You easily could have identified that after the first time. So even within his own, he was terrible performance, just horrible, god-awful. And he was allowed to behave this way for decades. You see the problem, right? You have somebody intentionally harming his own team, causing waste, poor quality, causing delays, and he feels like he has a right to perform and behave this way, right? And I pointed out to him, if he would just meet the average of the room, I think the whole press room was going to improve by 20%. That's how bad his performance was. But even with his poor performance, there were legitimate issues that even he would have that, yes, but the issue was it was always a lack of initiative. So when there was a legitimate problem, my point is he would take forever to report it. He would allow this problem to repeat itself time and time again. So here I am at the 45-minute mark. It's much longer than 10 minutes, isn't it? but I wanted to give you some details and some examples. So what am I saying? How do you manage individual performance based on trends? How do you base it on trends? Based on documentation. One note, one discussion can change everything. And if you don't take the time, and what Mark said to me was, John, as a supervisor, try to write 1 to 3 notes a day. Because it only takes you a minute to write a note. I mean, how much does this really take? 5 minutes? Because again, when we go to extremes, we really do a disservice to the organization. HR can't help us because we say, oh, you want to address a performance issue, and this issue has been going on for years. Well, show me your documentation. Oh, we don't have any. You see, because the other thing about managing performance, it's not editorializing. Like a lot of times, I've heard managers say, well, this employee, let me explain to you. You don't understand this employee. This employee doesn't care. This employee is lazy. This employee is X, Y, and Z. Whatever they might say, this employee only cares about themselves, whatever it might be. And some of that or all of it may be true, but it has nothing to do with managing performance. In managing performance, you focus on the issue, not the person. You can focus on behaviors, but not the person. So the mistake that managers make, is they're editorializing all the time. They're like an opinion person. Managing performance has nothing to do with your opinion or your editorialization. What you think about it. Okay? You're not a commenter on the news events. Like we were listening to, let me tell you how you should think about the news events. Let me tell you what you should think about this employee. Stop it. You're wasting your time. You're being foolish. The examples that I gave you was, for example, an employee who had the highest downtime within the press room. It's just an objective fact. And that excessive amount of downtime was hurting quality and waste, and all of that was measurable. Period. It had nothing to do with what I thought about him as an individual. It's all about orbiting around your customers and delighting them and putting everyone to work. And this person was refusing to do just that. Does that make sense? So yes. So John, to manage performance requires some work, but a few minutes a day. So whether you're writing it on a Post-it note or on a web application. And then the last thing I would say to you, but John, then how do you have these discussions? Well, we'll talk about that in the future, but that's where Zinger Miller training comes along, which I think was so effective. Because people have said to me, oh, John, you're good at dealing with confrontation, confronting performance issues. And I got to say, I might be good at it, but I don't like it. I don't like confrontation. But that's what motivates me, that says, okay, let's just get this over with. Let's just get this out on the table. Let's just deal with the results, because we're hurting our customers here. My motivation always comes from customers. And so my point being is that I understand having conversations is very difficult with employees, and there's all sorts of things that will come out, and I'll think about how to best communicate that. But that's where the Zinger Miller training comes in. Because Zinger Miller, you're going to learn, I focus on the issue, not the person. Where everyone else is just like focusing on the person and not really focusing on the issue. They're not doing the hard work of capturing the poor performance, the impact of that poor performance, and then how to articulate that. Okay? And that's what's so important, whether you're writing it on a Post-it note or putting it in a web app. Well, again, I'm going to say to you, this 10-minute conversation that I had with Mark, Director of HR, that said, John, you manage performance by managing trends, and you manage trends by having good, fair documentation on what people are doing right and what people could do better. And when we fail, we fail. So, I'll leave one last example. Have I had somebody, like an employee, going back to Hart Hanks, they made a mistake and it cost us a couple $1,000s. Okay? And it was one mistake. This employee had worked for us let's say 10 years. And they made a mistake and it cost us $2,000. Do you think they got a written warning for it or a verbal warning? No. They made a mistake. It's going to happen. It's one mistake, and it wasn't even a careless mistake. And if I remember right, there were threads of responsibility that went through a couple of individuals, but he was the last one who could have caught the mistake. So my point is, even people that have superior performance are going to make mistakes, and it's important for them to own it. It's still important to document it, because you don't know if that mistake isn't going to happen again. It's important to learn from it. Well, now I'm at the 50-minute mark, but I'm going to stop here. So I hope this message was beneficial to you. Until next time, God bless.